All right, I do believe we are live, and I am here with somebody that I've never brought onto my channel before. I will not introduce myself if you're here. I presume you know who I am, but would you like to introduce yourself to my audience?
Hi, I'm Jolie Black, and I'm a newbie to YouTube, but I am an academic and a teacher. I teach at the University of Manchester in the UK, and I study ancient magic. So I actually have a PhD in ancient magic, of all things. I did another one years and years ago that's 19th century history, so I can kind of speak to the history in this. But most of what I do these days is looking at ancient magical texts and going, well, that looks weird.
Based on your credentials, I think the assumption is that you are correct in everything, and anytime we disagree, yours is the authoritative opinion, and mine must be the amateur's dissent.
I'm going to be cautious about that from the strange and Norel perspective.
It's okay. I have a friend who also has a PhD in, I think it's early modern literature, and every time I talk to her about stuff, I'm like, okay, doctor, you I guess have to be right about this.
Well, what you learn from doing a PhD is, oh my God, I am so wrong about everything, and I don't know anything.
All right. Well, I think this chat probably sort of came out of the blue for everyone else. So just I did tell my patrons that this would be happening. I explained why, but for everyone else, this is happening. There's like a little bit of a story time, so bear with me. I got my vaccine boosters, which always take me out for like 2 days. So I spent that time watching drama content, specifically about Audra Winter and the Age of Scorpius, because it was something interesting that wouldn't require much of me, and there is so much content about that. So I stumbled upon your video, and I really enjoyed it, and I subscribed to your channel. And so if anyone is interested in, I think I linked down below your video about Babel, but not the first one that I ever saw of yours. But your channel's linked down below, so I do recommend if anyone has been following that drama, to go check out that video as well. But in any case, so then a couple weeks later, I'm driving home from work, and I'm subscribed to your channel, so now it's being recommended to me, and I see you have a video about Babel and about magic words in Babel. And I was like, that's really oddly specific, because that was like kind of low-key my specific issue with that book. And I was like, I'm interested to see what she has to say about that. And then I'm listening to in the car as I'm going home from work, and she's like, so this is actually kind of in response to a video by Leanna's Library. I was like, wait, what? So I watched the video with much keener interest now, because now I am under attack. And I really enjoyed the video, and I was like, hey, I am in no way bothered or offended, and I would love to continue this conversation. And so here we are. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting me on. I mean, I was not, I was not attacking at all. I thought it was a really interesting comment to make, and to have that point. It's not possibly because I come from an academic space where I had gone hard against another academic who I'd read early on when I was doing my master's. He said, oh, all magic is based on words. And I was like, wait, no, it's objects. I swear I need to go and fight you in the corridors about it being objects and not words. So I was coming in from a weird angle. But then when I watched your video originally 2 years ago, and I did something on my then blog, which has disappeared, just talking about how the words actually worked in Babel, because I just read the book at the time and was like, oh, this is a really interesting way of looking at words of magic from ancient Greek, and looking at ludicrous magic words that don't have any meaning at all. So it looked like a really exciting thing to kind of talk about. And then when you got back to me, I was like, oh my God, I was not expecting to be seen.
Well, I'm glad we make this happen. And yes, that is a movement house, I believe. And you have content about the movements, do you not?
I do. My academic article, I've actually done an academic article about the movements, is out later this year. I've just had the publisher's comments back, and I'm building this. This is something that I've been possibly.
I wish I was a crafty person. I'm not. I just pay lots of money to other people to be crafty for me.
Start Maybe I should do that as a job.
There's always people, like I love watching also like content people create of like time lapses of them doing art or sewing or building, things like that. And I like watching it. But they're oftentimes like tutorials, and they're like, oh, it's actually you don't need to go buy this stuff. You could just make it yourself. And I'm like, no, I know I can. I will not. So I will continue buying it.
Do I love the idea? Do I have the time? No.
Yeah, I love watching other people do it too. It's very satisfying to watch it all come together.
Oh, yeah.
But I still will not be the one doing it. All right. So again, since this I know what I said about Babel, that was like 2 years ago, and you know what you said about Babel, but people may not necessarily know who are here now. So I said a lot of things about Babel, obviously, but the thing specifically that like we want to kind of talk about or unpack today, and that your video that was responding to me, which is also kind of funny metatextually, since one of my criticisms of Babel was that it was responding to Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell in The Secret History, and then you are responding to me, responding to that book being a response to.
I'm pretty sure Kwang would love this.
It's turtles all the way down. But in any case, so like, yeah, I had a very long video, and it talked about a lot of different things about Babel, so we're not going to talk about all of that. But so the thing specifically that I talked about in the video was kind of preamble for my problem with Babel. So I went into a big chunk of it just saying how magic words as a magic system is a hard sell for me, and the reasons for it, and explained that, yeah, and it's not like every book that has that is a bad book to me. There's lots of books that I like that do have magic words as a magic system, and explained when and why I think that does work for me, or a book works despite that, but why in general, like, it's not my favorite, and why it generally doesn't really work for me. So there has to be like a reason in a book why this instance of it does work for me. And I was like, so all that to say, Babel's magic system is a magic words based one. So I'm already like predisposed to not favor that. So then you have like to do more work to convince me this is good. And it just did not do that work for me. And your video is about how actually the magic words magic system in Babel is brilliant.
Yes, so I know that sums it up really well. So I had my take was basically partly because the magic is written on objects. What I do study in detail is how magical objects are made, and looking at specific texts from Greco-Roman Egypt on how objects are put together and they're made, and they very often just use words written on an object, sometimes with a special ink, sometimes they're engraved, sometimes they are specifically magical words and they have no meaning external to that moment, and other times they do have a tradition or a meaning around them. And I was really intrigued actually when I saw your video, because I thought I had never seen anyone have that particular criticism, because speaking words just to make something magical happen seems to be like such a fundamental thing. I won't say it's universal, because I'm an academic and we always have to say, oh, there's someone out there, I'm an anthropologist, someone out there will have done something that's completely different and will have nothing to do with words. But it's so I thought that was a really fascinating take, that words didn't work as a way to approach magic, but there was something about the way that Kwang was using the words, particularly around translation and the need to re-say the words out loud, and that they had to be said by somebody who was a natural speaker of the language, that really kind of appealed to me. It was kind of interesting. Possibly partly because when I have I won't say I'm an absolute hardcore fan of Babel as a story. I'm rambling now, possibly, but it was one of those books that I read where I thought, this is an author who wants someone to write an academic article about this, if you know what I mean. This is someone who hopes that it's going to get the scholar. I thought, oh my God, is that going to end up being me? Having just done something on something as random as the Moomins and Moomin Mama's handbag, it could be me, potentially. I haven't checked to see if there is anything out there, but the fact that she was using this as a way to look more deeply at colonialism and the role of colonialism, especially the British Empire, also in 3 to 5 years constantly looking for good, decent translations from ancient Greek into English, that it was like, yeah, I could see how you build a magic system out of that.
That's I was gonna say, when in my Babel, also I have to ask, is my audio stuttering? Am I like coming through okay? Can you hear me okay?
No, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Okay, because
I hope mine's okay.
I'm seeing a lot of complaints about this, so I don't know what's happening. So hopefully that sorts itself out. But let me know if it's stuttering in any way. I hear you fine as well. Okay, but that said, hopefully everyone can hear. But yeah, I said in my review of Babel that, you know, a lot of it's outside of the context of it being a novel, you know, like the positions it espouses in the real world context, you know, the things that it's interested in are the reasons why I would have picked up the book in the first place, because those things do interest me, and because those are positions that I, generally speaking, probably, you know, with some caveats, hold and would agree with. And I think on Goodreads, my review was a very glib one sentence that I was like, as an essay, this is 5 stars. As a novel, it's 2. So it wasn't so much that you know, I take issue with, you know, like, let's see if we can do a magic system that kind of plays off of some real world tensions or real world historical situations, etc., etc. My main criticisms were like the execution for me down the line in every respect fell short. But so I was really interested, especially again to hear you talk about the magic words again specifically, because like that's the magic system itself. I feel like every other problem I had with Babel was something where I think there was slightly more gray area where someone I would for me, in my perspective, obviously a lot of people think my magic words take is very stupid, and if you look at the comments on that video, it is lots of people telling me that I should never read fantasy, that I don't understand fantasy. So that's cool. But in any case, I always felt that like the other stuff in the book that I take issue with, why someone else would feel differently from me because they want something else out of it. This didn't bother them. The magic system was something where I was like, no, I feel strongly that this makes no sense. I was like, I don't like, you know, not that, you know, like I will, you know, now hate anybody, or obviously not have you here. But I was like, that's the one where like I cannot wrap my head around like this making sense for somebody else. And so like it was very interesting. In your video, you talked a lot about cursed tablets and about how much this writing on silver bars and translation, whatever, that was very reminiscent of cursed tablets, and that whether or not that was the actual inspiration, you seemed to think that like that that inspiration is there, like maybe by osmosis. And so I didn't know anything about cursed tablets, so that was very interesting just to like learn about that from you. So I enjoyed that very much. But so when you were talking about cursed tablets, so a lot of my problem with magic words and in Babel specifically was, you know, when you're speaking these magic words in any magic system that uses them, who are you speaking to? Like, who is it that is meant to be responding to these requests? And so when you talked about cursed tablets, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, my impression was that they were a conduit for communicating with an entity. So like with a god, with a spirit, whatever. So there is like a conscious being that is receiving the message through the medium of this cursed tablet. And so with Babel, there is no spirit, there is no god, there is no like, you know, sentient force. It is silver, and silver itself that is conscious in some way enough to be able to comprehend not only like written and spoken word, but to be able to parse the meanings of those words, and then also be in touch psychically with the general, because there's a thing in Babel about how it can't just be the meaning of the word as it was at one time. It has to be the meaning of the word how it is used now, like largely. So it can't be a made up language, and it can't be like an ancient version of the word. It has to be like in current common usage. So silver's got a lot on its shoulders to be understanding languages, to be understanding them written and spoken, and to be understanding what the general populace is, how they are using them. And I was just like, I'm sorry, I can't buy that Silver is doing that.
And that is actually such a fascinating and important question for actually thinking about ancient magic and magic. And I'm jumping back into the kind of how that system operated in the real world. So I'm making it sound like they were actually not. But you're right. What they were doing with curse tablets, for the most part, was using them like letters, where they are meant to be received by some deity who is able to read, we assume, and can understand. And they start with just writing names, and presumably the deity has enough context to be able to work from that and do whatever is needed to make what they want to happen. So a lot of it is presumably either the deity is watching or is smart enough to go and find the person and do the thing and figure out which court case it was or whatever. As literacy improves, they get more creative in their responses, including pictures of what they would like to happen, pictures of the targets, pictures of them having success. Lots of magical symbols start to appear. We start to see a magical language appear. But there is a big discussion that has been going on for a while, for those of you who study this very niche discipline, over whether people talk when they, because in some cases, with some other objects, they actually seem to be talking to an object. So it will say, I've got a purification ritual. There's been some discussion over whether when practitioners are told in instructions, speak to the figurine, whether they mean the figurine or presumably deity hanging out in the room, just present, and the figurine acts as an anchor, but they're not actually talking to the figurine itself. It does get really wacky in terms of, the really mad one is the one where he has to build a figurine of Eros to capture a love interest, and he ends up going to the target's house. And it's like, are you seriously advocate like you have to go to the target's house at night, knock on the door, and then leave? Presumably because you have to show the Eros what
so you have to ding dong ditch your love interest in order for the deity to intervene.
Yeah, you have to say, Eros, she's in there.
I'm imagining an airport, where they have those like glowing sticks where they're like, over here. This is the one.
Yeah, pretty much. And so some of these rituals get really complicated, and they do seem to be suggesting that all do something. In other cases, they seem to be talking to the object, and the object is meant to know to go to the deity to do the thing, or can just directly do something. It's difficult to figure out what's actually going on, partly because we have the difficulty of translating from ancient Greek, and the difficulty from translating from often bad ancient Greek, from rubbed out texts where we only have partial words remaining, or where you really sure what is meant because you can't get into the practitioner's head. So you don't know whether you are dealing with someone who thought that material things were conscious. There was, for a long time, a lot of uncertainty in the ancient world about what was conscious, what was sentient, what was capable of agency, and what wasn't. So I have to say, there was an obsession with magnets in the ancient world. Pliny wrote about them, and a variety of other people wrote about them because they have this impact on iron and they affect iron. And
one of the as a kid, theories, like a modern day child is fascinated by magnets. They are just
yeah. And then you get iron filings all over them, and you hate them. Lodestones and magnets were really popular as stones used in amulets because there was a feeling that they might actually be sentient. So because they could see that they were having an impact, and one version of this is what we think has capability of actually physically operating on another thing. They're sort of moving iron around and go, wow, it does this stuff, therefore these stones must be sentient. So that level of confusion kind of gets taken over into magic, in that, oh, if you wear this stone, because this stone has this power over iron, which is really strong, and we use it for pretty much everything when we want to reinforce it, it's very powerful. So we're going to use that because it must have power, because it might actually have sentience. So some of my PhD was about discussing whether or not they actually thought that other materials had, like a daimon, what was called a daimon, as they were building up this concept of the soul at the same time, whether they thought that some materials had a soul. We know that, I've got one spell that involves talking directly to a plant to say, I am picking you, plant. I'm picking you to use you in this ritual. If you do not do what I say, and all of the other plants around here, they're all going to die if you don't do what I say.
I was going to say, nowadays people do get actually the recommendation to speak to their plants, but I don't think that is what is being.
No.
That is not the thing you should be saying.
don't threaten your plants.
We want to gentle parent
yes.
our plants. We don't want to threaten them.
I do like reading the ancient texts, but honestly, they are very, very violent. They should come with multiple content warnings on every possible level, especially the what they call the erotic magic or the love magic. So to kind of speak back to the silver thing, the possibility is that there is a sort of sense that silver has some innate magical property that is resonating with words, because they have to be spoken, and they have to be spoken by someone who has an innate knowledge of what that word means. Now, obviously, in terms of her themes, she's doing something else entirely, and the whole point of the magic in Babel is to drive this idea of cultural, not just cultural appropriation, but cultural theft. And there is a whole discussion to be had that, my supervisor is a strong part of it, the plundering of Egypt and other places around the world by the British Empire and China. But in terms of going back to the silver specifically and its material property, she seems to be suggesting in the text that it has some kind of property that goes beyond actual the standard physical properties of silver as we know it, that it has some other magical innate property that can carry words in some way. I'm intrigued that she suggested silver. I did do some research a couple of years ago to investigate that, and the British Empire did have this huge thing about silver as well, and not gold, because I was curious, because it's normally gold.
Like alchemy
if you want a good thing to happen, you go for gold.
With gold.
But that's
yeah. But so with this Madison and Babel, to me, like when I read it, I was like, from the novel reader versus the person who's like understanding why this is being done, sort of from the outside, the academic perspective, if I'm permitted to say, there's, like I get the historical context and why, okay, so we're trying to do a commentary on exploitation, on colonialism, on translation, on the power of language, on silver's place specifically in colonial history. And so then I understand that's the context in which this is. We're trying to do a thing in this book that addresses all those things. And then the burden is being placed on silver to do so many things in this story that it's just too much to ask of this one thing in your story. And I think I said that in my review too. I was like, I think it would work better if you kind of split it up, where there's like the different things in your story could address these different points all in the same story, where like an academic institution isn't going to be own translation component to understanding how to use silver, and then silver is used in like a way that doesn't directly involve the translation. Like you could have like all the pieces there instead of making silver do everything. So like the idea that, okay, so then the speaker has to be in tune with their language so they can speak the words at the silver and inscribe it on there. I'm like, this is already like tough for me to swallow, but okay, I guess so. We could say the silver is interacting with the person, and that's how this is happening. But then we add the piece of, but silver also knows that like the general populace uses this word this way, because if the general populace does not use this word this way, it still won't work. And I was like, silver has to do so much, like, has to be in touch with, in tune with, aware of so much. And I'm just like, silver cannot do it all.
It is interesting that she picks silver from that perspective, that she doesn't ever suggest that other materials have magical properties, which is, I think, something that she really should have done if she wants to say that silver has to bear the weight. She does talk about how if you create an alloy, it diminishes the power of the silver. But I do agree with you that certainly in the ancient world, it's copper. Pretty much any surface that they could write on that would take text, they would write on it. But the idea of just picking out silver rather than anything else, I do agree. I think that is probably a weakness in designing a magical system like this. She does seem to have tried to say, oh, well, if it's got too much copper in it, that diminishes the power of the silver. It's like, yeah, but if you're going on the idea that silver has some kind, you kind of need to talk about the rest of the material world in terms of, if you are just talking in a room, is there some other, could silver, does it also have to be written? Or is your silver cutlery going to start?
Yeah, so as much as I am like on record as frequently complaining about books that info dump or that just decide to tell you their lore and history apropos of nothing, because a character walks on stage and is like, I am a historian, and you know what I'm fascinated by is our own history, so let me just spend 3 pages telling you our own history because the author has thought of another way to work this in. So I'm very irritated by that. But that being said, the book was already irritating me. So I actually would have genuinely loved to have a historian walk in at some point and be like, and this is how we figured out it works. That I'm like, who figured this out? Who is the person that wrote in Mandarin on one side and in English on the other side and then spoke it and then figured out that the effect it was having was the very thing that was like missing in translation between, like, who did this? Like, who figured this out? Because that's insane. So if there had been a slow build, right, of that, like, where silver was like, seemed to be psychically affected by people talking near it, and if somebody gradually was like, what if we can like amplify that, enhance it, and like there was experimentation done over centuries where they could just make, with magnets and the power of magnets, like we've slowly kind of figured out like what's going on there. So if there was like in the ancient world, silver, like they just sort of regarded it as like supernatural thing, and people had it in their houses because it was like a blessing, because like when you had silver around and you said nice things to it, nice things kind of seemed to like happen or whatever, like the vibes were good. So like, and then they were like, well, what is the deal with silver? And then the colonialist British were like, we know what's going on with this silver because we've robbed you of it all, and we've like done a bunch of experiments on it, and we've figured it out, and this is what it does. And so they make all these people do this translation, and then then they figure out actually like silver works better if you don't like force a colonialist. But like there's like things you could do with that, but like that's never addressed.
It is such a missed opportunity, actually, because I mean, I was sort of going back over, because I have read Dr. Strange, Mr. Norrell and Dr. Strange, and because I teach a couple of philosophers, and she's obviously, Clark was taking on the natural philosophers and having a lot of fun, poking fun at them. But it is such a missed opportunity to say there's so much you could have done, just as you say, to discuss how the British took traditional ideas from all over the place. And I sometimes when I read Kwang, I think you've done enough classics, you must have encountered the Greek magical fire, you must have encountered them. It would be the perfect opportunity to say, back unlike this period, they were doing this and they did this, and that was the prototype, because drawing, writing magical words with blood on a brick didn't, it worked to some extent, but hey, then we tried it with silver. The silver things were all turned out to be hugely successful, and the other ones weren't. And
or maybe like silver is so pure, so the results are more stable or something, where other materials are less stable. So you do this with other materials, and like it can have some effect, but it's like really unpredictable and explosive and like radioactive. Whereas if you do it with silver, because it's so pure or whatever, that like it can handle the burden of all this psychic stuff you're putting on it.
No, I completely agree with that. I think that it definitely feels like it's sort of leapt into the present, and that because there's so much that had an impact on colonialism that she could have spoken to in the book, not just in terms of, oh, I'm going to make an effective magical system, but to use that magical system to explore how industrialization in Britain led to completely crashing entire economies in China and India and the whole East Indies, and everywhere the British went. I said, speaking as someone who's sort of at least partially British, just 600 years of nightmare. That's it. She could definitely have gone further and done more with it. It does feel like it sort of leaps into the present with this is how we figured this out, and we've worked all of this out, but where has this come from? It would have been really fascinating to do that. And I thought, surely you would learn that, because kind of history.
Yeah. Well, it did also kind of beg our belief that the course of history was utterly unaltered by the presence of this extremely powerful magical substance in the alternate universe. And so then either that needs to change and the course of history needs to have been altered, or if it's not, then there needs to be some work done to explain why this came out of nowhere. Therefore, history up until the point where we found silver is completely identical to our own history. And then bam, like what if like history now diverts course at the point at which silver comes on the screen, and like now we're doing things differently from how our own history and
given how long we've had access to silver, you'd think that it would have had some impact, that you couldn't just say, well, I'm going to set the cutoff.
I mean, I guess it could be that the British are so bumbling and the British are so bumbling and oblivious that it took invading other places where they had figured this out but weren't really using it to be like, oh, we can exploit this. And that's where history now changes, is because they didn't just find a pretty shiny metal. They found a pretty shiny metal that is really powerful. They're like, oh boy.
Yes, we could do something with this. I mean, I suppose to some degree, I think she might be using silver sort of as a corollary for tea, but doesn't really work, because tea we just consumed, we just got hooked on tea, and that doesn't, because she focuses very specifically on China and doesn't really deal with the way that the British actually, in order to get to China because they wanted tea, obviously they used opium to do it, but and then they were very successful in East Bengal at completely bending East Bengal to their will, and then they really struggled in West Bengal because the social structure was completely different, and having a militarized power in West Bengal gave West Bengal a lot to fight back against the British, and they had to work with them. Sorry, I'm getting off onto tangents here, but it does highlight how once you sort of test the limits of the material side of what she's trying to do, I love the idea, and I can see the points that she's making, but it would completely change history. Like, why any power at any time could have figured out that magical thing, and I'm pretty sure they'd have done it sooner.
Yeah.
It's whether you want fantasy writers to go back through and go,
And if
I'm
they
as a
didn't
fantasy
figure it
writer,
out sooner, then you should do something in your text to acknowledge like the right innate reason for
yes,
that not to have happened. Like to make it.
yes, especially because you have texts that, you know, these are classicists, so they will have had six. Yeah, they had some of the magical papyri that I work with. They had dug them out of the ground by then, and that's set literally in between two of the big sales of magical papyri that I'm doing a script on at the moment. So I'm getting all excited now, but yeah, those papyri existed. They include writing on silver and tin leaf and gold leaf and lead to produce magical effects in the world, very similar to that, using magical words. So you'd think at some point, given that I mean, one of the things that I'm working on is the fact that these, particularly the earlier 2nd century texts, were written in multiple languages. So people were writing in Greek and Demotic, which is a script that's used to write Egyptian, and Coptic, which is a later script to write Egyptian. Latin is nowhere. It's not a magical language at all at this point. I'm pretty sure everybody looked at the Romans and went, nah, you guys are not magical.
It's only nowadays when, you know, the like Catholic
so
exorcism that everyone's like, Latin is the magic words.
Something happened in the medieval period. It's very interesting. I would love to do more.
I mean, the mysticism of the Catholic Church and that Latin is the word, the language that no one understands but must be spoken to God, I'm sure is the contributing factor.
Yes, yes, very likely. So we know, you know, these things existed. I mean, it's one of those ones where, you know, where they say when you're writing a novel, there'll be one person who's an expert in the thing who will come along and go, wait, hang on a minute, no, that's not right, and then the whole thing falls apart. This might be that moment, because you're pushing me to think, yeah, without that history, if you don't have the if you've got the ancient texts where they were using writing on silver, and they were doing it, we do have rituals where the instructions are written in Greek, but the what you have to say out loud is said in Coptic, or it's said in Demotic. And that makes me think, yeah, the idea of translating, of working between different texts and languages would have come up in the ancient world if it worked as a thing. Egypt never would have fallen. We'd all still be worshipping.
So another part of the sort of magic words and silver system that really, this was less of a logical whole for me and more of a personal issue, that I'm interested to hear what you think about it, because this wasn't part of your video that I can recall. That aside from does this work, is it a believable magic system, is the whole thesis of this book, right, is, or at least one of the theses, is that translation is an inexact science. You know, that you cannot have a one-to-one. You cannot have perfectly translated a sentence, a text, whatever. So it's always just going to be the closest best guess, like to the best of your ability to capture the spirit of the thing, the vibe of the thing, to convey as much of the meaning as you can. But it's never going to be perfectly one-to-one, which I fully agree with. And I am bilingual, so like that is also my experience. And I have been in trouble on YouTube for saying that, like, when I read something like Dostoevsky, or if I read Dumas, then I enjoy the texts that I have read, but I never feel fully able to say that I love the work of those authors, because I don't really know what they wrote and how I would feel about the original words in the original language if I was able to read the original language. Maybe I just really like this translator's interpretation of it. I will never know unless I learn to speak those languages. And then people have been mad at me for saying that. But I'm like, look, but you cannot know, because it isn't a direct one-to-one. It's just not possible. But anyway, so like I fully agree that this is when the book is making this point, right? Because that's how the magic system ultimately works, is that it relies on the idea that there's going to be something missing in translation. But the part of it, like that's a very gray area, soft, like human debate thing, where like 3 different people translating the Count of Monte Cristo are going to they're going to have translated it slightly differently, because the way that they would translate what this sentence was is going to be different from how this other person would. And then they might debate about it and be like, well, I think this is kind of more capturing the spirit of that sentence. And the other translator will be like, no, this is more so what I think captures the meaning of it. And they're not necessarily going to agree about it. But so in Babel, Silver is like, no, I am the ultimate authority. I know the thing that was missed in translation, and I'm going to do magic based on that. And I was just like, Silver can't like be the arbiter of what is the thing lost in translation.
Yes, it's like she's trying to that there is a magical force in the mystery, and Silver is like operating as some kind of perfect Roche's thesaurus. Yes, we could explain this to you completely. I wasn't sure if that was what was meant, or if what the words were doing by sitting them side by side on the silver was that it was actually capturing the force, almost like having 2 polarities sitting
like,
next to
what's determining the properties of those 2 things?
Silver is
determining
holding Silver is holding it all together. And as kind of a neutral observer of, I just look at what looks weird, and then I go and find some theorists, some esoteric theorists to explain what's happened, which is essentially the whole of my PhD. Is Timothy Morton and Tim Ingold have said some really great stuff about materiality, and here's what it means in the context of ancient magic. Is it what she seems to be suggesting? And again, why not gold? Why not copper? Silver is chosen for external reasons. My internal brain kind of goes, yeah, you need to have a reason within the world why it would be silver and not gold or anything else. Why does this start to fall apart when it's wood? Is it any wood? But that's a materialist coming in and going, wait a minute, yeah, I have issues here.
Well, I mean, like, the story could function with the whole, like, there's no history doesn't need to diverge at all if we invent, a kryptonite type of thing that does not actually exist, and there's a meteor that lands in China.
Yes.
And this is where the only source of this substance is there, because this is where that meteor fell, so you have to invade China to get it, and this is why this was not a factor in the world politics. But then you can't have the thing about, no, but in or not ancient history, but in history, silver was specifically like this colonial like priority. And it's like, okay, I mean, I get why silver is the thing. You have to sacrifice a piece of this, and there's like a complete unwillingness to do that.
It's like, so I think, and I think that comes down to her being more interested in, and this is where it falls down as a novel and is often, and I can see why people say this should have been an essay, is that it does, and I get it, and I have to be cautious with my academic positionality and say, I'm a white person coming in and studying different culture and a different culture's ancient history, and I have to be conscious that the reason why I'm doing that is because the British marched in and took over by force, and by capitalist force as well. So I'm being cautious when I say that I fully get the rage and the desire to write something that pushes back and makes the really big strong argument that she's making about the need to hold colonialist forces to account, but yet on a very trivial level, the math, I think it would work.
No, I mean, that's where I fully agree, and I was like, that's why I agree that this is a position you should have, and that this is a force you should want to attack, but also that's why I want your case for it, your argument for it, to be as strong as possible. And so these flaws in your attack are bothering me.
It would be so cool, actually, if it wasn't the meteor that had landed, because that would really speak, I think, more powerfully than, because there's silver all over. You find silver deposits in lots of different places. Using silver as a replacement for, because obviously they were trying to get tea, and tea grows anywhere, but it had to be Chinese tea, which incidentally really annoyed the British plantation owners who were growing tea in India, because they were like, why does it have to be Chinese tea? We've got tea right here. So it caused a lot of issues in Britain that they were going after Chinese tea quite so strongly. And now all of our advertising for tea is mostly for Indian tea. Would you believe? It's
Well, just the
yeah.
fact
But
that
anyway, that's a
associate
tangent. But it does.
Britain
If you
so
have
strongly
the,
with tea, not as a cause of colonialism, but as the most quintessentially British thing of all time is tea. And you're like, well, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk.
asterisk, asterisk. Yeah. So in order to get hold of this drink that we are obsessed with, we had to.
I say, like, we think of like olives and Greece together, but that's because they grow there, and like they were eating them olives and olive oil a lot because that's what natively occurs there. So it's very natural to associate the two. It's appropriate, but associating the Brits and tea, as we do in the exact same way we associate olives in Greece, comes with a lot of baggage.
It does. I can't think of anything these days that's associated with Britain or England that doesn't come with such intense baggage. As I watched her slide into
a few years ago, I saw someone, I think it was like TikTok or Instagram years ago, there was like an ad at Christmas time in England for one of the stores, I don't know, Harrods or something, or Asda or something like that, and they were like, there's like nothing more British than Christmas or something like that in the ad, and the first person responding to it was just like, is it?
Yeah, I mean, people painting St. George flags. I believe he was Syrian. St. George. I think he was from what's now Syria.
Yeah.
No, it's and nobody knows. It's not taught as standard in this country at all. It's just, oh yes, once upon a time that we had this empire and it's gone.
Sad.
And it just, nobody knows. Yeah, sad. And it's like possibly a really good thing for everybody else. It would have been even better if it hadn't happened. So, I mean, I like the idea, actually, if you had a meteorite that
how silver just came on the scene out of nowhere, but it wouldn't be silver.
The scene, and then we're rewriting Babel, improving it as we go. That would work better. I could definitely take that point, and think particularly knowing that people have been using silver tablets for such a long time, that you're sort of like, she might have. I've now, because I've almost finished Catabasis. Sometimes I think she has brushed past the Greek magical papyri in passing, and other times I think maybe she hasn't really looked at them, because, and I think, oh, you're so missing out, you know?
Yeah.
Because it would have added some depth, and certainly to think about how silver was being used, because the Egyptians would have come up with it.
Somebody somewhere. Well, that's where, again, like we've said now several times, but to reiterate it, I think there's like two different ways that this could have been done, and but done more successfully than it was done, because it went with this third way that it doesn't make sense. So either silver has been used all over the world in more like organic traditional understandings of like different like cultural practices, different spiritual practices, and so it's done on a much smaller scale because there's like a reverence for the silver, so it's treated more as a holy object when it's used. And then the British come in, as they do, and just like yoga went from a spiritual practice to something that you do at your gym, to where they take something that is a spiritual practice, which is like communing with the silver, and they turn it into this machine for industry, and then they go everywhere to get the silver. And that's like going to start to make a different point than the book did, and you have to rewrite the course of history a little bit to account for this going on, and them learning about it, and then finding it, and them industrializing based on it. But then it explains kind of like, again, how we came up with this and where it came from. For meteorite, it's not silver, it's a different entity altogether. And yeah,
I mean, it would have worked so successfully to her broader point about the way that British colonialism worked, had she done that with the silver and say, well, there were these other there are other civilizations that were using silver and that they had this kind of spiritual connection to them. Silver is used in tablets, especially to commune with Selene. So if you want to talk to Selene, Hecate and Kore, very violent. So in order to evolve, is connected to the moon, because Helios is associated with gold. Very basic sympathetic magic connection there. But
it looks like a thing, therefore it's connected to the thing.
Yeah, if she'd done that, that would have provided a perfect magical illustration of what the British did in so many different places, where they just walked in and took what were spiritual practices and reduced them to these very simplistic ideas, and then just stuck them up in a museum, or they took them into private collections, or they stole them, or they made use of them in whatever way made money, basically. And that certainly would have made the point even clearer.
Yeah, it would have emphasized her colonialism point.
Yeah, it would have really nailed it. At times, I think she goes very heavy. I mean, I get it. Getting white people to understand, sometimes you do have to. I follow a lot of great Black scholars on Threads, and watching them just sometimes. I know, but those people aren't going to pick up Babel anyway.
Yeah.
But
there was that too, where I was like, are you preaching to the choir? Because anyone who doesn't agree with you is not going to be convinced by this book. And the people who do agree with you, like me, are going to feel talked down to and like lectured at in a way that is not enjoyable. So who is this for?
Yes. And that's where I think I came down on the side of, this is almost like she's waiting for an academic to pick this up and do all of the, without thinking about the reader as in, I want this to be an enjoyable book, because you get so much more if you've sat and enjoyed a book and loved the book and just had fun with the book. You take so much more away from it in terms of, oh God, and now I'm really angry about British colonialism. You know, rather than a book where you feel like you're being constantly, because I get it, the scene where Chakravarti goes and he's doing they're replenishing the tablets, and they have to go and speak over the tablets again. And on a surface level, from my material magic stuff, I really liked that. I thought, oh great, I love the idea that you have to go and speak it, because eventually the vibrations or whatever it is happening.
So we're starting to forget what you said to it.
But he goes with the idea of sound as a material, and that there's something special in the word spoken that's picked up by silver, but then why silver and not gold or lead or anything else? And there you have a problem. We have concurrent civilizations.
I think you are giving it a much more benefit of the doubt reading, which is fair, because you might be right.
I am, yeah.
But my cynical reading of things like that in the text are that there aren't reasons for it outside of she wants in the plot for them to be actively not just having set this in motion and it works forever. You have to continue to do it. Why? Like, does it make sense in this magic system for there to be like a renewal of this? No, but I need my characters, like I need the structure that they function in, that they work in, that they operate in, that they're hired for, to require continual maintenance for the story. And so then this constantly, the story is at tension with the magic system, because they are not really like that. The whole like psychic knowledge of how people use these words, I think, isn't there because this makes sense for the silver magic. It's there so that people can't be like, oh, well then why don't you just make up a language, and then you have endless translation possibilities to do whatever you want with it. She has to be like, no, it has to be a currently in use living language used in this way. That's the only way it works. And you're like, no, but how does that make sense with the silver that you just explained to me? Like that, those don't actually go together. You put this in here so that people can't poke other holes in it.
Yes. And for me to come in and say, yes, well, so there's this new materialism thing that we're all doing now, where we understand that sound has a material value, and then it's blah, blah, blah. But that is not, I don't think as an author, I don't think she thought I'm sure if I walked up to her and say, "Oh, so I figured it out," she would be like, "Oh, well, that's very clever." But really what I wanted to talk about was how sometimes cultures need to get violent in order to get rid of colonial oppression.
Yeah.
And that's really her point. And I'm going, yeah, but also can I talk about the materiality
Well,
of
that's
magic?
where again, where I
Which
was like
I
that.
feel
There's
so
so much
bad about.
time spent in the book going into specifics about how this magic system is supposed to work, because we do get told this a lot, you know, like very specific classroom explanations of the like mechanics of this. But then the mechanics do fall apart. So I'm like, you're better if your ultimate point is meant to be that like silver is more just kind of this metaphor, and this whole thing is just sort of about colonialism and about destroying colonial powers, then you would be better served by hand waving the magic system more and just saying that translation is required for it, and not going into so many specifics about the mechanics of how it's supposed to work, because that's when it's much more easy for someone like me to come along and be like, that doesn't make sense.
Yes, yeah, I have a problem with this. And I think that's another way that I think this is possibly why catabasis works better.
It's so interesting because I've heard much more I haven't read it, but I've heard much more criticism about catabasis than about.
Yes, although there are people who did feel I was re-going through all of the stuff that I read at the time, and there was a lot of criticism of it does feel bad. It was, and
that was most of the criticism I saw. It wasn't like the structural issues with the book.
No.
It was just like, well, it's a little preachy.
Yeah, and that I think catabasis has a better tone to it. That because the tone is satire, and she's satiring academics, and we live in an age when everybody hates academics, so it's like it's right for satire. And mind you, I mean, given that it speaks to me on a very personal level, as I was saying before we started, it's like, yeah, being a PhD student would definitely go to hell to get my supervisor back for a panel committee. That I think that potentially, and I don't think she's expecting the magical system that she's using to do as much massive cultural heavy lifting as she expects it to do in Babel. So while I can apply and say, oh, well, there are current theories that we discuss in new materialism and abound, and that would potentially make this work, you'd have to apply it to every physical material, and you can't just have silver as the special thing, as the
unless it came from outer space
substance in the world. Unless it came from outer space, and then it turns out it's aliens.
Yeah, which would be a very different book. Story. I acknowledge.
That is a very different book. A very different book indeed. But yeah.
Okay, so I'm not completely convinced that the magic system is actually brilliant.
No, I think it was interesting. It's certainly interesting to see. Oh, I can see what you're doing, and in the microcosm in the present, there is an effectiveness that she's pointing out as someone to come along and go, literally, this is how it would work. But also, she needs to go back and do all of that stuff, to do the Tolkien thing, where you go back and spend the next 50 years writing the background to it and making sure that the alternate history.
In my review, you know, I brought up Tolkien as a counterpoint, and was like, well, you know, some of the reasons why the ring can function on multiple metaphorical levels in Lord of the Rings is because there is no mechanics of the magic system of the ring. It's never like, oh, because it's made out of this particular type of gold, that it interacts with the wearer's skin in a way that when they touch it, it's now like tapping into their psychic, whatever. Like, there's none of that in Lord of the Rings. Therefore, it can function like completely as a metaphor of like the draw of evil, of temptation, of corruption. It can be all these things. And there's no possible way to fact check it or to poke holes in it, because there is no system to poke holes in. It's a symbol. It's a metaphor. And so people were like, well, the silver in Babel is also just a metaphor. I'm like, but it's not. It could have been, and that probably would have worked better then, because then you couldn't poke holes in it. But there is a system here with a lot of specifics that you don't get in Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings would probably quickly fall apart if you tried to explain the mechanics of the golden ring that they're carrying around.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, isn't it, with designing magical systems, is that the harder they get, the more into hard and fast rules you get, where you are trying to both create a magical system that has rules but also functions as some kind of metaphor for something else. You run into have to think this through. It's kind of
And the more
disappointing.
complicated you make it, the more holes there are going to be.
The more holes there are going to be. And it wouldn't have been hard to say all materials have some magical energy and create a hierarchy in the same way that ancient magic creates a hierarchy. Alchemy always created a hierarchy just because gold was the most valuable substance that has generally been around. It's difficult to get hold of, it's hard to work with. So obviously you use it for economic purposes. Although
maybe in
our
fan fiction version of Babel, Britain was already doing this with a different substance. They used it all up. They run out of it. It wasn't nearly as powerful as what they found elsewhere. And so then when they discovered caches of silver everywhere that actually do this way better, then they were like, oh, cool.
And then you have,
let's use this instead.
And then you also have an allegory for coal and fossil fuels, which was a problem that the British faced. They're having to go abroad to get access to getting better access to fossil fuels that they desperately needed to run the machines. And that would have given you another angle to come in on.
Yes, there is that. She also could have fixed this by saying that there is like a translation god that silver is communing with, and that it's just conduit for talking to the translation god.
Wow, that would be an interesting idea, because I have encountered a lot of demons who do a lot of different things, but one that actually works specifically on translation I haven't encountered. They're always kind of assumed
the god of linguistics.
Multilingual. They all, they know whatever language. And if we still created gods to suit our purposes as they used to do in the ancient world, someone would have come up with one in classics, and they would have started sacrificing to it in the 19th century, and that would have been such a great addition to Babel. If the British were secretly doing rituals to the translation god.
And that also, one of my other criticisms of the book, which wasn't so specific to the magic system, was that I was like, this is not dark academia. And it's fine that it's not, not every book has to be dark academia. But to me, the way I define dark academia is not a book that has darkness and also academia that are just coexisting. It's the darkness has to come from the academia, has to be an exploration of like the dark side of becoming so obsessed and so utterly devoted to your studies or to what it takes to do those studies. So I'm like, in Frankenstein, that's dark academia, or The Secret History, that's dark academia, because it isn't like there's a school setting and then there's also a murder that happens just like on the campus. Like that's not dark academia. That's just like there happened to be a school and then there also is a dark thing that happens. So like Babel is like about colonialism, the darkness of colonialism, which is fine. That's a fine book to write. That's not dark academia though. And so if it was about how the translation magic actually like required like, maybe chipping away at your soul, because every time these students are asked to do this, they have to sacrifice a piece of their soul to this translation deity, and that's why they keep using foreign labor to do it, because they don't want their British students to have to sacrifice pieces of their soul to the translation deity. They'll make the import students do it. Like that would be dark academia and colonialism.
And my God, that I think that would have nailed home the point on such a level. When you say it like that, that would really have nailed home just how destructive it was, and in places still is, just how destructive it is to be subject to a colonial power, that in order to survive you are actually having parts of your soul taken away from you. I perhaps it's her because she is fascinated with languages more than anything else. And I think that
Oh, yeah.
definitely is what comes out in the writing, which is not a defense. But my God, in some senses, it's almost like she's softballed with
Mhm.
Babel, and she could have gone much harder. If you've got a translation god in the basement of Babel or the top of Babel Tower, and you've got to sacrifice
Or everyone
to
thinks
it,
Babel Tower
you've got
is
to give
just
up
this
a piece of
academic
your soul,
institution,
and
but
you're
really it was built to worship this deity, and like that's what's going on here. Yeah.
oh, absolutely. And that because it's in that sense it's very modern, and one thing that is absent is the role of Christianity in the way that the British also took Christianity into different places and kind of subjugated populations using that and forcing that onto
Good
people
thing nobody does that nowadays.
in various horrific contexts. And oh yeah, that's not happening anywhere that we could speak of. That would have brought out another layer of the cultural context. And we live in a secularized society that we very often ignore the role that religion does play in people's lives on a much more fundamental level. I have to kind of explain to people when I explain what I study and say, well, gods are kind of literally sort of there, but of course they think about gods differently, because the gods are just this bunch of messy people who have just got tons more power than they have, who are not particularly interested in them. But when you introduce Christianity as a force of colonialism, because she talks about cultures being stolen by the British, what she doesn't talk about is how the British replaced to adopt their Christian values, and they use their Christian values everywhere they went.
They leave their culture like a changeling child in the vast net of
yes, and that doing that, if you use the god, we've now completely rewritten Babel, and I've come down on your side. You see, we do win with this. We've now rewritten Babel, a new book that has a translation god that you have to sacrifice to, that is essentially,
and if they did that, they're also souls. Like, to add to the dark academia of it, not only could they be requiring the foreign students to be doing this, which is, sacrificing pieces of their soul, but the students themselves could be also kind of enjoying it and become addicted to the power they get from participating in this. And so they know that this is destroying them, but they are kind of like complicit in it because they do, like, it's maybe a drug like, or again, like at that Faustian bargain where like you do get power from this, so it does feel good in the short term, but it's burning you out, it's taking your soul.
Yes, because that certainly speaks to the temptation that, and the complexity around how colonized societies dealt with being colonized in multiple ways. So Amitav Ghosh talks in Smokes and Ashes about how his family were sort of minor bureaucrats in East Bengal. So they kind of benefited from being part of the hierarchy. And the British were very clever in making sure that they exploited hierarchies wherever they could find them. So cultural hierarchies, religious hierarchies, they made every possible use of those. That would have added so much to, particularly because she wants to make the argument about cultural theft being as critical as material theft, and she hasn't quite pulled that
doesn't really address that part,
because
by paying,
you can
like,
talk
lip service
about
to it.
material extraction. She's reduced that to the language, and it's like, but culture is more than language and how language is spoken. It is the gods that you worship. It is how you go and you live every day. And once that is taken away from you, but then your own people who you originally had in your village and that you spoke to, or that were in part of your community that you spoke to, are now colluding with the British. You don't even know who you can trust. And that is destabilizing for civilizations. So there's just so much more she could have done. So I've ended up on your side.
Those I don't know that she's ever said this, but those bad faith comebacks from authors who don't like when they get negative reviews, and they'll say, well, could you write it better? Now we can say, yes, we could.
So anyway, so we have the translation job. No, I like just from the hours, the weeks and hours I spent trying to find a decent translation of just one word in one procedure in ancient Greek, and I could not. And just
this
fighting
again,
with a word for
that's
weeks
why
and weeks
again
and
it
weeks, and it
bothered
was
me
so
the whole
important.
sort of
It's just,
making language an exact science when this book is making the point that it's not, but then also it needs to be in order for this to work. I mean, aside from the, you know, who is deciding what it means, languages themselves, the idea that there's this clear like box that this language is in, and then this other box is this language, when there are so many languages that splinter off because they have been, you know, it's similar to speciation, which if you want to make it a hard science, I guess language is similar, but where like now the language that like the way that Spanish, you know, it was, you know, this one language, but because of colonization, the form of Spanish that is spoken in parts of the world is different from the form of Spanish spoken in others. So when you're doing this like translation thing, they are Spanish. So like when does it become like its own separate language that we can officially use for translation bars? You know, like when is it too similar? Is it basically the same language? Is it like, you know, where are those dividing lines? Can Silver tell us when a language has officially like become different enough to where it's its own language now? Like, who's
Silver
deciding
magically
this?
knows. Silver will come and tell you.
Yeah,
when you have
linguistics is so
officially...
messy, as she well knows. So to then be like, oh, but like Silver can perfectly like, you know,
Silver will hold that difference. It will know it's magic. It's the diamond inside, because that's where it's missing, is that because ancient magic worked with sort of potentially diamonds having inside the materials, that we all had a diamond, including all materials have a diamond, plants have a diamond, everybody gets one. That it would know it's magically very capable with language for some reason that other substances aren't. And as you say, it's like I read in translation a lot, and I'm a Solzhenitsyn fan, and not being able to read the original Russian bothers the hell out of me. And knowing that no matter having done years and years and years of Greek, I'm never going to be able to read and understand ancient Greek, because it's not a spoken language anymore, except in some really niche areas. And not having access to that, and knowing how words were being used at the time and what people actually meant by those words. And we still have this problem now, is that it isn't an exact science, and you could argue the toss over a word. And I am looking at footnotes on my second screen right now, which is like 20 scholars arguing over one Greek word. 50s, they're just arguing over one word.
If she wanted to write Babel like actually believably, the Babel Institute would never actually get anything done, because the scholars would be spending so long debating the meanings of these words that they never actually get to inscribing it on the silver, because they haven't yet decided that this is exactly how we should do it.
Yeah, it would be like, well, we tried writing it like this, it didn't work, because I don't think she even deals with word forms either, and obviously doing Greek with its 5 cases and all of the different forms you have to know for, and the middle voice as well as the active and the passive voice.
Also, the way it seems to kind of accidentally disqualify from consideration as being a real language any language that didn't have a written tradition.
This is very true. And
it requires both.
Many languages don't have a written tradition. Certainly many languages that have now been lost by colonialism do not have a written tradition. Or the written tradition is extremely late, or the written tradition borrows letters from other,
or the written tradition languages. Is itself like the product of colonial forces.
Yeah. And does Silver know how to do linear A? Because if Silver knows how to do linear A, then I really want... Silver should have been able to translate. The translation god could have come and explain all the languages to us. But then we wouldn't need the Rosetta Stone.
But so like, I mean, I'm coming from this I'm Latvian and my degree is in anthropology, so that's sort of like my perspective. And like Latvian is a written language now, but
Yeah.
we got a written language from the Germans because the Germans showed up and were like, you need to be able to read the
Yeah.
Bible. And in order for you to be able to read the Bible, you need to have a written language. So we're going to give you one. But so that means before the Germans did that, Latvians would be disqualified from participating in silver magic because we didn't have a written language. So
And yeah, and how much influence would German forms have on
yeah, well, I mean,
Germany?
there's a lot of borrow words in
Yeah.
Latvian that are from German or from Russian or whatever. So there too, you know, like Latvian words for things are often the German word for it or the Russian word for it. So then, does the silver distinguish between like when I mean this as a Latvian using this word or I mean this as a German using this word because it's the same word?
Yeah, and I mean, I can take a point that English has kind of wandered around the world and robbed other people of the words and just adopted them, but and to some extent that is appropriation, but at other times and places that has been people themselves, local people adopting the language and introducing those words because they were needed for that place. And then does make me wonder, what do you do about Pidgin and the many languages and Gullah-Geechee that have arrived insistence on putting people who didn't speak any languages speak any common languages together as slaves. So enslaved people had to go, right, well, we've got to work together, we need a language. And just came up
so
with
the
one,
part of
which
the part
I
of the
love.
book where they're
like
where they're going around and sort of like re-upping the silver magic, you know, they're going around and like we're saying they're restating the words whatever to like to boost it or whatever because this is required. That doesn't make much sense as we've discussed. But if instead, because language is a living thing, then these translations, they work in the time that they were done, but as language evolves, even in a short period of time, like, you know, with the internet age, language evolves very quickly. So if these silver bars need to be replaced and renewed, not because like they just kind of fade over time, but because like language is a living thing. And so then as soon as this is not quite how people are meaning this word anymore, this bar starts to like fix it because it's no longer meaning this thing.
Yeah, so what you would have to kind of, it would make more money for the British. It would make more money for Babel because they'd have to say, well, your bar's not working because it's out of date because the word doesn't mean the same thing. So they would fully take advantage of that. And that's something that, you know, if the book carried on beyond 1836, if it carried on to like 1936 or it made it to 2025 and you still had a British Empire based on this silver magical system, you'd have them going around saying, well, we changed the meaning of nostalgia, for example.
It's they have to go around because the silver needs a software update.
Yes, the silver needs and you know, it's a physical material, so you have to replace the whole thing, which is going to put pressure on silver deposits. It's going to make silver even more difficult to get hold of. But then you're also going to need to have people who are updated on language and know what the latest way of speaking is. Does make me wonder what a 2025 version would look like because every 5 years all the words update. And I'm going to sound so old now because I turned 47 yesterday and I have to keep asking
Happy
my
birthday.
students like, what words? What words? Thank you. What do these words mean? And
well, so there too, then does silver
know
how it's in common usage by this age group and that's what it's
now?
going by, or like is it going by how it was understood by the Oxford English Dictionary, or which version of the word is silver going with?
Does silver understand slang? It's another issue. But I suppose being classically trained, I was focused on the classical forms of language
There
as
has
opposed
always
to
been slang.
maybe the colloquially. There has always been slang, and so she I don't know whether maybe that would have and made that weaker magic just to kind of really bring the classism up a level, just to say, oh, it's not just that it has to be, you know, by a native speaker, but it's got to be the best version of that language as well, the most poetic form.
Again, to like drive home the like populist revolution point, maybe the Babel Institute is only going by these like hyper academic dictionary definitions of these words, but there's a whole revolution fermented because people are using like their own local colloquial understandings of these words in their translation on these bars, and they're undermining the powers that be through that. Like, there's so many options that you could complicate this.
Or you find that there's another metal or another substance out there that isn't silver that really responds to slang terms or the new language, and you use that, and you can use that to fight back. That would be fun. The new younger generation coming in and saying, "Well, we were forced to develop a whole new language because of you guys."
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, back to the, like, I was like, Babel is a book that on the bullet points of the things that it's interested in doing and the things that it claims to be doing are things that are of great interest to me, that I think would make for a very compelling novel. And then when I read it, I was like, oh, but no. You kind of did these things, but like, no.
Yeah, it is. I remember reading it. It's a very slow read, and you're sort of feeling like you're supposed to be making notes at the same time. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, I do appreciate. Yeah, we really need. There are people who really need to hear this stuff, but I don't think they're the same people who are reading this and would appreciate it. You know, there are potentially livelier ways of doing it.
I think
doing the same thing and getting the message across really well.
The metaphor that I always come back to for this type of thing, and I'm pretty sure I used it in my review of Babel, is the food one, which is it's you kind of have to treat readers like kids that won't eat their vegetables. And so then if you have like not very good food that you've shoved a massive vitamin into, they're going to like notice the vitamin and not want to eat it, and it's going to be gross and it's going to be an unpleasant experience. But if you offer like nutritionally robust meal that is also really delicious, then you will have gotten your nutrients without even realizing it. And that's like a much more compelling way to sneak in your argument in a way that takes hold like on the sly, because you didn't even notice that you were being kind of preached to because the story was just so compelling.
Yes, there are. It is trying so hard to do all of this stuff with silver and with language that the thrill of the read gets lost. And that's the system. You can apply the materiality to it, but in terms of reading the book, it's like, oh my god, especially towards the end, that it became quite hard work to read. Although, you know, I will say I think I was working on my corrections at the time, and it was like, do I want to read that, or do I just want to read The Expanse? Because, you know, you go back to books that are easy and fun when you're having a hard
But so
time.
like I think a book can be, you know, really dense and multi-layered and complex without feeling like a chore to read. And I think that's what, you know, that's where we come back to people like me being like, well, this just isn't a very good novel. And so the critique is like, oh, it was like too complex and academic, and you're not cut out for fantasy, you're not cut out for academic like works. It's like, well, no, but like if you're really good at what you do, you make it enjoyable despite the complexity, despite the multiple layers of reference, meaning, history, whatever. Like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell doesn't feel like a chore to read.
No, and I completely agree with that. I don't like the idea of saying, oh, you know, you must be this academic to read this book, and if you don't, you know, that doesn't help anyone, because that doesn't help get the message across. It just alienates people for no reason at all. And particularly the moment that we're living in, experts, people like me who spend all of our time in libraries, or these days just looking online at digital catalogs, are, you know, it's very difficult to explain what we do in society anyway, and make it make sense and make it meaningful to people. And to say something like, oh, you must be this academic to read this book, if you don't get it, it's just showing just how little you know. It's like, no, that doesn't help anyone. That's part of the problem, is we have failed as educators if we have just not been able to get across that message, especially if you're doing it with a novel, because storytelling is the core of how we learn as human beings. And if you can't do it with a story or that specific story, there must be another way of doing it. And there are plenty of other books that have looked specifically at colonialism and have made it compelling, and developing magic systems that explain, that work. Probably you need to do less of the technical magic, because the moment you get into that territory, there is room for poking holes that make it problematic. But that's how you once you grip people with a character they're really invested in, and then you subject them to truly awful stuff, they're like, well, now I'm mad at the British Empire.
Yeah.
And it's like, good. That's what we need.
Yes. Well, because I think there are quite a lot.
That's me ranting about my
I think there are a lot of fiction books that people have read and cited as like, this really changed the way that I sort of thought about this, or it made me want to look into this history because I didn't know anything about it, and it made me really upset. And I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about Babel in that way. I think I've heard people who already think this read Babel and go, oh yeah, like this book is so right about those things that I already think. It wasn't opening anyone's eyes to this stuff. It was just like reiterating the point that your audience already agrees with.
Yes. When you try to write those things from that particular angle, I do think, whenever I haven't read The Poppy War and that trilogy, but whenever I read her work in particular, I feel like, oh, there's an element of at which she's sort of trying really, really hard to do this deeper thing. And in Babel, it really, that other thing that she's trying to do, building the theme and building it all into the story, has gone so far in the other direction that the story has gotten lost.
Yeah.
I did read a review that said that the footnotes in it, like, I'm that kind of reader who for particular books would lovely. Terry Pratchett does it brilliantly, but they don't work in Babel because they do come off as horrendously preachy. And I feel bad for saying that. I'm like, I'm a white person. Do I have to say, maybe it's time for me to sit and be preached at, because hey, 600 years of preaching at the rest of the world. But I don't know. It's yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
That's
not the place of a novel, because a novel is being voluntarily picked up by somebody who wants to enjoy what they're reading. And if you are failing at entertaining and compelling your audience, then you have failed at writing a novel. And I also felt, because of the whole, like, the stated, I don't know, goal or later assertion that like this is a response to Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell and to The Secret History. As soon as I saw the footnotes, I was like, oh, you were like, they did it, or she did it. Susanna Clarke had footnotes in her book. There's going to be footnotes in my book. Like, but why? Like, you can't just have them in there because.
Yeah, I think my best interpretation of what she was saying was, what she was trying to do was to say that, and she needed to say this explicitly, was that Dr. Strange and Mr. Norrell does what a lot of that English culture did at that time and still does now, which is that it treats the empire as something that happened overseas, and that it just ignore its impact overseas, and have this wonderful fluffy adventure between two ridiculous men and all of the ridiculous people around them, and English ancient magic, and ignore that, and the only time anyone appears is the nameless slave, and there's just that one reference to it, and I can kind of, yeah, I can see that point, but that could have been made explicitly, that if she wanted to say that you wanted to respond to that, would be to say it ignores its colonial legacy at this point that was a really critical factor, and be more explicit about that, and then have Babel engage with that in a much more explicit way, particularly because she's talking about ridiculous English naturalists and natural philosophers who were all ridiculous in their own way. I mean, this is rich, young, white sons, younger sons who had nothing to do with their time, so they did all kinds of nonsense. And yeah, she kind of, if you're going to say that you're doing a response, say what that response is.
And yeah, Jonathan Strange is helped. Yeah, Jonathan Strange is helped by the fact that, one, the British aren't being depicted positively. So even if it's ignoring the colonial or cultural context, it's not also then like, glazing the British in a way. So that helps. And then also, like, even when it has this sort of, like, to your point, a slightly narrow kind of scope in terms of the history that it's engaging with. But even then, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is this long because it has rewritten the history of Britain in order to make space for this supposed existence of magic.
Yes.
And Babel is not done that. And it's even, if Babel's point is that, it's ignoring context, then I'm just also not going to include context in my book, but I'm responding to the book that I was mad at for not including context. Like, what?
Yes, yeah, and you can't, and Clark was more engaging with what was, and I think is a legitimate interrogation of English culture, the English culture, particularly after the Industrial Revolution. We've lost that ancient culture. Successive groups having come into the British Isles and the English going into other places has kind of changed that, made it harder to interact with that. We've lost a lot of our own culture and our own understanding of our own traditional cultures. And Clark was kind of engaging with that. She was engaging with the fact that this fascination with a scientific form of magic, and with magic as in this new world, this new industrialized world, it's lost. It's almost similar to what Tolkien was talking about, was that his worry was about industrialization destroying cultural heritage, and that sort of magic that underlies everything. If we are reduced to scientific explanations for everything, we will lose our sense of the magic of the world. And there's a tone to Babel that perhaps if it had gone more satirical, because there's a lightness to Doctor Strange and Mr. Norrell that you can enjoy it. And I like Piranesi better, but I think that's just because Piranesi is such a sweet character, and I just sort of thought, I think you're handling this really well.
But I mean, so like what our earlier,
about all of the books I've read. So.
To our earlier point, then, having a greater emphasis on the cultural use of silver prior to British colonial industrialism taking it over would again emphasize that point about how you're stripping these things from its cultural context. Yeah. Yes,
and it's such a shame, given that she must have encountered the texts, the ancient texts that work with silver, and I'm sure that it must exist in a range of other cultures. I mean, I obviously, when we become academics, we get very, very specific on this really tiny thing that we've been doing. I read something saying that she was engaging with the 19th century German philologists, and if she's talking about the decades, sorry, my cat's woken up, the decades and centuries that they've spent trying to, so we have tons and tons of these magical words in the Greek magical papyri that don't come from anywhere. They are just they are almost impossible to say. I won't even try saying them because they're like 19 syllables long, and they're insane words. They're often repeated, or the variations of them are repeated, or they're palindromes. And we think they were spoken out loud, and that the point was that you were saying things that sounded weird and incomprehensible to your client or whoever was listening. But there was a whole contingent of philologists who were obsessed with the idea that this, then you've got a whole other set of scholars who were kind of laughing behind their hands at the philologists who were going, yeah, this must be actual language. And they're going, oh my God, you guys, they think it's actual language. So I think if she was taking on them, it would have been like, yeah, you could have had so much fun with that.
It's too bad Silver wasn't in the room to help you guys out and figure out if that was really a language.
They could have told you. They could have told you. No, so.
But yeah, I mean, also.
Yeah, so I've ended up coming down on your side and going, yeah, we could have done so much.
But there's also, I mean, like the fact that that Tolkien is such a great counterpoint to so many things in this is also interesting, because Tolkien is a linguist. Like, if there's one thing that Tolkien and R.F. Kuang would agree with, or that would see eye to eye on, or have mutual interest in, is etymology, is linguistics, is the power of language. And it's just so interesting that these two people who clearly have a mutual passion for this topic, one of them produces, you know, the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings, and the other produces Babel, and they are so completely different in almost every way conceivable, but also in their incorporation of the power of language in their fictional worlds. It's so opposite. Yes.
And the way that Tolkien, I mean, because he did classics, and you know, he would have been well versed. I mean, he has he had the advantage of being the old white man, benefiting from the situation that gave him all of that privilege. But you get the sense of a real deep love.
Yeah.
That doesn't quite come through in Babel in the same way. And even reading her other work, I don't get the sense of a like a deep love. And because you can tell when authors really love what they're doing and they're engaging with, because you just get the sense that if you open the door and let them in, they wouldn't take 5 minutes to, while you were boiling the kettle for the cup of tea, would be telling you how excited they were about this thing that they were working on. And I don't get that sense so much from Kuang.
In Babel, again,
I don't know if that's a horribly personal take.
I'm not going to disagree. When I was reading Babel, my impression, the vibe that I got from it, but this is entirely my perhaps projection, is that this inclusion of all of this detail about specific etymology in service supposedly of explaining the magic system, but is going on these long tangents to explain the etymology of a particular word and why this is going to be functioning the way it is on the silver bar. It felt less like Tolkien being like, oh, it's so interesting, I just really want to tell you about it, and more like, I know this stuff and I want you to know that I know this stuff, and so here's a bunch of this stuff so I can like show you all my knowledge.
Yeah, and I want her to be excited and thrilled. I mean, certainly reading Catabasis, I'm left thinking, I completely agree with you on your critiques of academia, but I didn't see that she had a deep and abiding love for the research itself. Mm-hmm. And I think it does come across more because there's more passion in Catabasis than certainly there isn't in Babel. There isn't a sense that this is, oh, I love this word, you won't believe what I've discovered about this word. But it does lean so heavily into the critique of academia that I wonder if it's a thing that is very common with academics, and the majority, if not almost all, PhDs now leave because there are no jobs for us. You know, I get money, I'm paid sort of 7 months out of the year, without sort of turning this into I rant about the difficulties of working in academia in 2025. But and I don't even know what I'm saying now. It's because it's very late.
Oh my god, yeah, it is for you.
Week of teaching, that's where it ends. That's where you end up, is you just end up babbling online to people on YouTube for hours on end. Is that you can get that your passion that takes you into a PhD and gets you through the PhD, that passion gets absolutely stripped away from you, and you just end up going, I need you guys to appreciate that I've done all of this work. And maybe that's what's been going on. I probably shouldn't read too much into her as a person, but
I mean, but like that's interesting to me, to read a book about a character that's experiencing that kind of frustration. So again, like if it was present in the text, this passion turned sour.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think I talked about this in my Babel review about how much I would have liked to see what's his name? His name is Robin, right? The main character in Babel.
Yeah.
That he pretty much immediately is on board with like take down Babel, take down Britain, take down the colonial powers, even though he kind of grew up in it. And I would have so much better liked to see a book that was sort of him kind of going with it, and then slowly the scales fall from his eyes as he realizes how insidious this is. And so we, the reader, go on this journey with him of being like, oh, like I have this nice life in Britain where I get to go to the school, and thinking it's all kind of fine, even though maybe there's like a part of you that feels a little weird because you are treated differently, but you're like, no, but like I have this great life and everything. So then you kind of like convince yourself that this is all fine and good, and then slowly over the course of the book, this kind of like determination to defend it turns into a determination to destroy it, because you've like realized you've been had. Like that would have been a much more compelling journey to watch this character go through, and also to take us along for it. So the fact that he so immediately becomes an avatar for speaking against like colonialism, where we don't see any kind of like change in his character or growth or coming to realize this, it was such a missed opportunity, both from convincing the reader and also from just making a compelling character arc.
Yes, because he functions most of the time as just this cipher through which the reader is meant to appreciate what is happening. So he is like, we keep going back to this one scene where they're going and repairing the silver bars, and when the housekeeper is quite racist towards them when they come to the house, and he makes this comment about how they all want to benefit from having these bars that are read by Chinese and Indian people, but they don't appreciate that they're going to have actual Chinese or Indian people. And it's sort of quite a heavy way of looking at that particular form of painful social interaction, which still happens today. And it felt like Robin is just there for the reader to witness that and to say, oh, this is a thing that happens to people and it's really painful, and you need to appreciate that is happening and it's really painful. And I'm like, I do appreciate, and I know, and you are telling someone who is more than aware that this happens, and that this happens multiple times myself in clumsy and terrible ways. And I think it would have been more powerful to have his character react more, to do more, as you say, to have more emotional response and depth, rather than simply being the person who is meant to show the reader this stuff and say, oh, isn't it bad? Because quite a lot of the time he's just sort of described as, because he's half white, as he's almost passing, which sort of complicates the picture, and would have been a great discussion of that difficulty.
Yeah, well,
something
to your
that,
earlier,
to
your earlier point about, people who are the victims of colonialism, who then also kind of benefit from it because they slot themselves into the hierarchy and are able to rise because of the colonial powers that are now hurting their countrymen or their fellow, others of their race, of their culture, etc. And to the kind of mental gymnastics, the kind of cognitive dissonance that those people kind of have to arrive at in order to justify to themselves what they are doing, to justify to themselves what they are accepting. And it would have been great to see an exploration of that in Robin, where he holds this cognitive dissonance for as long as he can, because, you know, the self needs to believe in the self being the hero of their own story. And so if Robin is justifying these things to himself for a good chunk of this book, because he needs to believe that this is fine, because this is his life, and that it becomes more and more apparent to him how unjustifiable it is, and how he cannot do that anymore. He cannot justify this to himself anymore. And the fact that somebody who thinks something is kind of wrong all along, I don't think is as easy to radicalize as somebody who thought this was like ardently defending this because they needed to, because they really like what I think of is like people who were raised in a household that wasn't particularly religious. They're also not aggressively atheistic. They're just kind of like, it's just not a factor in my life. Whereas people who are raised evangelical and like are really forced to make this a part of themselves, they react very strongly to be aggressively atheistic when they leave the church or something like that, because they had to go from convincing themselves this was fine to now being radicalized and saying, I have to tell everyone this is not fine. So like if Robin was convincing himself this was fine, it would be so much more believable to me that he's now willing to be so radical and so violent because he's, you know, this pendulum swinging in him.
Yes, I mean, to imagine that exactly. I was just sort of thinking about there was a young lad, wasn't there, a few years ago, who was aggressively ethno-nationalist, and then he joined ISIS, and the switch feels it just feels unreasonable. Like, why would you do that? Until you appreciate that it's not what he believes that matters. It's the force with which he believes it. He's been given the same struggle of emotional force to something different. The old one fell apart. He found one that was newer and more violent that he could go with. You know, you're exactly right. That tends to be what happens. You know, I grew up in a vaguely atheist household, and will continue to be vaguely something, probably because that's what happens to you. Being British, it's very difficult to be
too cynical.
I think redoing that scene and having it be Robin passing fully and then realizing that he's actually Chinese, and the way that just grates when someone realizes that you are not what that they had seen you as, oh, you're one of us, and then when they realize you're not one of us, and the way that they treat you differently, just the flip on a dime, would have been amazing to just present that as a story, as part of his arc towards, right, we need to crush this system. If he is fully engaged with it and then gone, actually, it turns out this system doesn't benefit me at all, and it previously did, how dare you?
Yeah, exactly.
That would have made an amazingly compelling story. I mean, that's what, throughout history, that is what has created the strongest sort of flips in terms of emotional force, both in fiction and in real life.
I mean, I in general just like to see a lot more complexity and nuance and grayness in character work in my books. And so, when it comes to oftentimes in historical fiction that wants to be feminist, we'll have the feminist character who has lived under patriarchy her whole life. Some man walks up to her and is like, well, you are a woman and therefore you are stupid and you cannot do this thing. And our feminist heroine is like, I have a brain, in fact, and I should have the same rights that you do. And I'm just like, this is not how sexism works. This is not how feminism works. This is not like women who live under patriarchy. They internalize a lot of that misogyny. She wouldn't even necessarily bat an eye at that, because that's what a lot of people would be thinking. Like, institutionally, you actually have no rights. So the very idea that you should have them, like, wouldn't necessarily occur to you unless someone pointed it out to you, and so the same kind of, like internalizing the oppression that you live under and sort of drinking the Kool-Aid and convincing yourself that this is actually correct, that you should be treated this way, because you don't have the power to change it. So it's much more emotionally like easy to accept it rather than to fight it. And so then you internally you're like, well, it must be right that I'm treated this way. I must be lesser. I must be whatever, because there must be a reason this is set up this way, because it's too exhausting to every single day fight a war where I think that this is wrong. And I think every single interaction where this is happening is wrong. And, you know.
Yeah, it's like the, you know, speaking to feminism, it's like the structure of a lot of suffragette movements and early white feminism was, no, we want to be like men. We will deal with all the other women. This is just white feminism for other white women that makes white women more like men.
Yeah.
But women are still, I mean, you know, the things that I read for my first PhD, which was 19th century history and dealt with very explicitly women's work and the family, the level to which women absorbed their misogyny was astounding. To have women in groups where men were sitting, you know, they were sitting around with men who were saying, but do women think? Do they have more intelligence than a cow?
Oh
and I'm like, did you not say anything? And you know, the working class women I read, there's a wonderful book called Maternity, and it's out of print, and it's such a shame. But it's working class women writing about their experiences of having children, and it was appeal to get the government in 1915 to give out a maternity payment for women so that they didn't have to work up until they were actually giving birth. And an awful lot of the women were just saying, it would be really nice if we could say no to men, to our husbands, like right after we've given birth. Just that.
Yep.
That's what we'd like. That would be so cool if maybe we could have half an hour after giving birth to decompress before we had to do what our husbands wanted in bed. That would be nice. And you think about what a small ask that was.
Yep.
And being nasty about the woman down the street who was an alcoholic and obviously looking after her children very badly. Quite happy to be mean to, you know, women who weren't working as hard as they were, or on the other hand, dismissing their own struggles. You know, women who had 13 stillbirths, you know, one case, and she was just like, but I haven't had it so hard. And you're like, oh girl.
Yeah.
Do you want to sit down?
Yeah. So when a little earlier this year, I did a swap with another creator where I picked some books for her to read, she picked some books for me to read, and then we talked about, you know, how that went. And she picked one of the books she picked for me to read was Radium Girls. I don't know if you've read it, but you've probably heard of it. The women working in the they were painting like radium onto like dials, so they were getting radium poisoning. And so that was the first book that I read from the book she picked for me. And every book I read after that, even though they were characters that were going through terrible things, suffering, whatever, I just couldn't take it seriously because I had read Radium Girls and the horrific trauma that they went through with this radium poisoning. And I'm reading this other book where I'm like, these are bad things, but I'm like, you don't know suffering. You don't know. If you haven't had radium poisoning, don't complain to me.
Yes. Yes. Girls who they worked in phosphorus mines, because one of the tricks for working class men was to say that they wouldn't take jobs that put them in actual danger and really awful. So women worked in phosphorus mines, literally picking up phosphorus and scooping it around, and it just destroys your bones completely. So they ended up with something called phossy jaw that just destroyed their skulls. And there's a level at which you just go, oh my God, I've not suffered.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter how hard it's gone, but there's another level out there. But that, you know, that does speak to the way that women just, you know, in the 19th century, you know, women were just going out and doing what they had to do because that's what they thought they had to do. There were additional pressures on them. They had a family to look after. If their husband wasn't working, he didn't have a job, they had to go and get a job, and they had to do whatever it was. And that led with colonial powers is that people just went, I just have to survive. And I think that would have been a really great element to draw out the sort of, well, I'm looking after me, I just have to survive. in this horrendous system. We can't get rid of the British. There's nothing we can do, which I think was something that formed a lot of the struggle that people dealt with who did want to try and do something
and
about
again,
the British.
like people just don't necessarily always know when injustice is being done to them. Like, obviously, if a group of soldiers marches into your town and starts slaughtering you, yes, you can clock that an injustice is being done. And yes, for sure. But when it's subtler, when it's systemic, most of the time, unless it's pointed out to you, or unless you've started talking to a lot of other people who are starting to kind of have this thought, and you start to realize it's not just you and this might be wrong, you yourself living under the system, like, again, I think of Radium Girls, and the fact that they're being subjected to medical exams by their employer, but they are not giving those medical records to the girls. So the girls don't even know they have radium poisoning because the company is withholding that information. And the idea that you have a right to your medical records is not occurring to these women. They're not sitting there going, it is wrong that this company is not giving you my medical records. They're just like, I guess it's fine. I guess that's what is done. It's only later that they start to like band together and they get a lawyer and this starts to get out and there's newspapers on it that people are like, wait, what? Like, what's happening? Like, that can't be right. We should do something about that. That you're like, now we think that's crazy that someone that your employer would say, oh, I'm going to subject you to a medical exam. You have to have the medical exam and you don't get to see the results of it. We think that's insane. Just like when we look at historical time where a woman is being told she can't do this or that she doesn't have this right, whatever, we think that's insane. And so when we write about those historical time periods, if you write a heroine who's like, it is wrong that this is being done to me, it's just not believable unless there's other factors in the story where like maybe they come from a progressive society and have now been transplanted into a not progressive society, they might have that reaction. But if they've been born and raised in this system, they're not going to clock on the daily the injustices of it. It's just life.
And the women who did notice, just to take the example of women, were women who came from incredible privilege to start with, and they were given access to resources that other women, because they had a sympathetic father. So you think about Mary Shelley and her mother, that Mary Shelley's perspective is very much coloured by her mother's perspective as one of the very early, what we would consider to be a modern feminist, and that has that impact, and it starts with the privilege of having you access and then you're able to see it, but it doesn't happen automatically.
Well, and it also, you have to have the privilege of having the time to notice it.
You do.
So they're just raising their kids, going to work, getting food, and there is no minute of the day that is not occupied with something that needs to be done. There is no leisure time in which to be thinking, well, is the system that I live under entirely just? Like this, there's just no time for that.
Every day, and no such thing as a weekend. You don't have time to think beyond what you're doing in the next 5 minutes. Absolutely. So we have now completely rewritten Babel.
I'm glad we fixed Babel. I mean, that's what I mean. Like, it is a rich premise. Like, we have neither of us has ever had an issue, I don't think, with the premise of Babel. You were just slightly more satisfied with the execution than I was.
I found, I think it spoke to, on initial level, it speaks to the interest in materiality of magic and how that works, particularly because I got fascinated by sound quite late on in my thesis. And it's really a sneaky opportunity for me to talk about the stuff that I really like, which is curse tablets and, getting your pleas for justice sorted out by Abrasax.
Well, I mean, any excuse to nerd out on a niche subject that you're particularly interested in.
Absolutely.
Far be it from me. I mean, one of my favorite book series of all time is, before we went live, we were just talking about how like a book that you feel passionately about is probably not one that's for everybody, because it's probably pretty niche and pretty specific to like a particular type of a thing that you're interested in. So I adore the Under the Northern Sky series by Leo Carew, because his background is in anthropology, and he has a very kind of like a Viking-esque kind of like flavor to how he's depicted an alternate history where other like species of like humanoids have also survived and they're all coexisting in the world. And I just eat it up, like eat it with a spoon. This is my favorite thing ever. I've read the first book like 7 times, and other people pick it up because they hear me loving it so much, and they're like, I mean, it was fine. Like there was, I guess, some good battle and politics in it. I don't get why you love this so much. And I'm like, because you didn't study anthropology and you weren't obsessed with this attention to like anthropological detail that he put in there that no one else would notice or care about. So it's not for everyone. But
anthropologist in me absolutely loves that stuff. No, I'm the same with The Expanse. I will tell everybody to go and read The Expanse, and I've had many friends go, I can't. One, it's 9 books, and I can't sit here for 9 books, all of which are 600 pages long, but also it got too dark and they can't do it. I'm like, no, but it's so good.
I have read the first 2 and I've been meaning to continue. So I've not read 9 books. I've read 2, but I've been enjoying what I've been reading.
I did a piece for Strange Horizons, so it allowed me to rant about it. I was comfort reading it, literally comfort reading it just again, and it was like, oh, so now thank you very much for allowing me to rant about ancient magic on yours.
Oh, anytime. I mean, that's the thing too. Like when we were saying that it was so disappointing not to see that sort of passion come through in Babel. I think it's less of a, it's a shame that this person doesn't have this passion, and more of a, it's really fun to hear about things from somebody that is passionate about those things. Like so much of my watching stuff on YouTube is niche subjects that I don't know anything about and that I don't actually care that much about necessarily before or even after. Like it didn't inspire me to go now research it, but I loved listening to this person who knows so much about it and is so excited about it tell me about it, because that's infectious. And I'm interested while you're telling me about it because you're really interested in it. So like, sure, yeah, tell me all about it. That sounds very interesting.
Oh, thank you. It's that's pretty much what I'm here to do on YouTube, is go, I'm really excited about this specific deep niche thing that nobody knows anything about, and you can know about it for 2 hours and then you can go away.
I might have imagined this, or it might have been someone else, but I think you might have mentioned that you also watch Milo Rossi on YouTube, but I'm
yes.
So like
someone went, oh my god, I wasn't expecting CoffeeZilla and Milo Rossi and Foodie Beauty in one video.
But so he,
yeah, I'm a huge Milo Rossi fan.
But so archaeology is part of the anthropology degree, so I had to take archaeology classes, and it's my least favorite part of anthropology. Like I took those classes because I had to, and some of my professors for those classes, because they themselves were so passionate, then I did ultimately enjoy the class because I liked the professor a lot, so then they made me feel interested in it because they were interested in it. But like I don't really like it. And so I watch Milo Rossi all the time, and he's so obviously excited by archaeology. Like that is his specialty. And so then that doesn't make me now change my mind. That doesn't make me now go, actually, I was wrong. Archaeology is what I should have focused on in my degree. Absolutely not. That's not the thing that's going to get me up in the morning to scream into a camera, but it does for him. And I like watching that.
And I think that's the great thing about YouTube, isn't it? Is that the content that really seems to work at this particular level is we're all here to kind of like find other people who are passionate about something. And it's like, I watched Kiki Chanel talk for I think an hour and a half about the Vampire Diaries controversy. So I have no idea what's going on in that's a huge scam. Oh my god, I was so there for that. I don't know. I walk away at the end of that and go, I'm really sorry that she's had to go through all of that, but thank you very much for telling me in such minute detail about all of the issues that are happening in that world. And I don't know, it's fascinating, and I love to hear about people being passionate about that kind of thing all the time. And you don't see that so much on mainstream media anymore. It's such a shame. Or at least when I do see it on the BBC these days, I'm like, wait a minute, it's that guy again, and he's always wrong.
There, you got to watch out for that. When someone's really passionate about it, you got to make sure they're also right.
Yes, yeah. It's me going and checking my sources again for the 50,000th time.
Because, the charlatans out there, they can seem passionate. You gotta watch out.
Yes. Mind you, they always manage to stick a supplements advert in there.
It's a good clue.
Yes.
The fatal flaw that tells on them all.
Yes.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I hope you also
it's been great
enjoyed
to
it.
to you.
Thank you so much.
I had a fantastic time. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for responding to me and my terrible Babel review.
No, it was a great review, and I think it was really fantastic to have, because you don't see that, because it's so expected for magical words to be seen as the default side of magic, to actually take issue with that and to say, wait a minute, if you're going to do that, you need to show me how that works. That is a really great challenge to me. It's sort of like when I watch Reads with Rachel doing rant reviews, and I'm like, oh, that's how I have to make that better. Okay, good challenge.
Honestly, I feel like this is why I have the reputation for being a fantasy reader that doesn't like fantasy, because 9 times out of 10 I'm like, well, that didn't actually make any sense. And so then everyone's like, you don't actually like fantasy. And I'm like, I do, and it's good.
Make it good.
Yeah, I just have a really high bar. Okay, meet my standards.
Yeah, I'm always getting called a snob. I've got so many times I've gone and complained about books to book club, and they're like, you're just a snob. Your bar is too high. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to read bad books. If I can, the moment you get something in your head and you're like, wait, I have a problem with that, I will be 50 pages further in going, no, I still have a problem with that one thing that guy said.
Yeah, well, that's the thing too. I mean, there's lots of books I think that you and I probably both have, and a lot of people have, where technically, like, if there's a thing that is established as a thing that you dislike, or that that you dislike, or that you have a problem with, but there's a book that you like that does have that thing in it, it's usually because the book was so good at doing this other thing, was so good at, everything else, that you were like, okay, I mean, I'm enjoying this despite that. And I am, like, outside me is acknowledging that this thing is here, but it's fine. I'm just gonna ignore it because this is just too good to let it be ruined by my irritation with this.
Yes, there is a limit to the petty if you're actually having some fun.
If Babel had been more fun, I would have been less petty.
Yes, I think I felt like I was being taught a lesson. That was how I felt coming out of reading it. Was I intellectually understood what they were doing and why they rebelled at the end, and why the violence was necessary. And I'm like, what I want is for someone to write that book in such a way that I can't stop reading it, because I'm going, oh my God, just absolutely. And the book that made me do that, weirdly, was Caroline Elkin's Legacy of Violence, which is a non-fiction history of the British Empire and everything they did. And that had me, and it's a huge tome, it's an enormous book, but that had me just like page after page after page, because it's like, I hate these people so much, I hate these people so much, I hate these people so much. And that, if you could harness that and put that in fiction, that where you are going, I hate this empire, so you just somebody come and crush it, then you would have literally no issue with any of the other issues that come up with people criticizing Babel. I think people who have been like, yes, go hard. Guys, just blow up Westminster Bridge, just get on with it.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of books where the heroes, or at least the protagonists, maybe not heroes, are doing really excessive, very violent things, either in service of revenge or justice or vigilantism or whatever. And usually, if it's done well, the problem is that you are too on board with this, that you're like, actually, I shouldn't be like, that's probably not justified vigilante violence like this, but I feel like I want this to happen, and that's probably bad.
I will say that Catabasis was the one where I was like, yeah, and that maybe she's gotten closer with Catabasis. And I know people have a lot of problems with the fact that it sort of does what Ernest Cline did with Ready Player One, which is overload on the references. But Ernest Cline did it with
Yeah.
80s law, and she's done it with academia and specifically classics. And so it's there for anyone who really gets like that kind of really sort of dusty academia type stuff. And that, but if you get beyond that, it was the passion of her supervisor being so utterly awful, and having already understood what it meant to be a PhD student who desperately needs to finish and is exhausted and has been ground down to the bones. That worked better for me, and I could see that, yeah, you really shouldn't have killed your supervisor, but I can kind of see why. Yes, so that she's done a better job with that one in just engaging you with the character on an emotional level rather than in an intellectual level, which is what Babel has can grab you and go and sit back and intellectually go, ah, yes, I can see why they're doing what they're doing, yes, but I'm not engaged at all. What you want for a story is for that emotional engagement that hits you on the deeper level, where as you say, you are deeply engaged with the violence, and the trick is to step back and go, hang on a minute, do I need to sit down and have a word with myself?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the I feel like Babel is the equivalent of being in a French history lecture at university, where this slide is about how this particular event caused a popular uprising, and this is the number of people that were killed, and these are the reasons why this happened, and we all understand how these forces would result in a popular uprising. And you're like, yep, that makes sense. I'll remember it for the test. Versus watching Les Mis, and you're like, yeah, vive la révolution.
Exactly. That is the fundamental trick of storytelling. You don't want to understand their position intellectually. You want to understand it on such a visceral human level that you're like, I don't care that I look differently to you, that I speak differently, that everything about us is completely different. I will light torches and throw Molotov cocktails for you.
I'm always laughing because my mom always says that, oh, she doesn't like to watch violent media. She doesn't like to watch violent films or violent television shows. Her watch history stands as evidence to the contrary, but that's her position. But then we'll be watching something, and it won't necessarily be an extremely violent thing, but something maybe speculative, where there is an assumption that violence is on the table. It's not like a modern rom-com. There's people with swords and guns, and they are killing people, so this is an option. But there will be a character, and my mom will be like, "Oh, just kill him. Why don't you just kill him?" I'm like, that's my mom, ladies and gentlemen, the soft-hearted, the pacifist.
Yeah, but that's the nature of humans, isn't it? Is that we're a bundle of contradictions.
She's like, I mean, in real life, of course, I don't think my mom, if she saw someone who was doing the things that this character is doing, I don't think she would actually argue for we should go and murder them. But in the context of the story, she's like, kill him, just kill him.
But and again, that's what story is there for. It allows us to get that catharsis of, there are times where we would never do this stuff in real life, but actually there is a kind of a cathartic value in being able to go, oh, this is a real problem. I'm just going to solve this in the worst possible way, just for immediate relief. And that's part of what story is there for. And part of what a lot of the ancient magic that I look at is there for as well, which is why it's often very difficult to read.
I mean, I personally find it very cathartic watching the very true and very real history of World War II as presented in Inglourious Basterds, where Hitler gets shot in the face. I love that. It feels great.
It's so much more satisfying than what actually happened. It does have a pure cathartic value.
We frequently get told very skewed and sometimes outright untrue things about history in history class. I say we just adopt that one as a truth, because if the rest of it's going to be shaky on truth grounds, why not have some joy in there and include...
Well, there was a huge thing about not, ensuring that he never had a grave, so that he couldn't be seen as a martyr or anything like that. And I sort of think, well, maybe if we'd gone with he was shot in the face by a bunch of guys, that actually would have been a pretty effective way of saying don't follow him. His ideas are really bad.
Yep.
And maybe we wouldn't be going through this again. Just
Who knows? Who knows? But
Who knows?
unfortunately, we're not in that timeline.
No. We picked the worst one, the worst timeline somehow.
I don't know if it is.
It has been absolutely lovely to.
I don't know if it is the worst one. There's probably a worse one, but we are in the goofiest timeline.
It's a very weird timeline. I keep waking up to new explanations for autism that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah. That's yep. It's a great time to be alive.
Yeah, which kind of what a time to be alive, especially having to teach. This is off topic, entirely off topic. I have to walk in and teach about this stuff every day. I'm like walking in and saying, so science and how it works in society. So this is what's not happening.
Yep.
Yeah, it's very, very weird.
It's exhausting. Just every day more.
Yes, it is.
All of those
absolutely.
All the dystopian books that were meant to prepare us for this, they did a pretty good job in preparing us for some of the material realities that we'd be facing in this dark time. What they didn't prepare us for was how unserious, how goofy, how silly, how clownish the perpetrators of these atrocities would be. I was hoping for something more sinister and something more, imposing as a villain to this story, but alas.
Yes. I have to teach on Wednesday. I have to teach Nazi science and the growth of eugenics, and to think how it took a really long time to get from we're going to start measuring people's skulls to we're going to exterminate millions of people. And that is a really weird thing to be teaching right now. But at the same time, I was saying to my students last week, they've kind of missed the bit where you have to build up towards it. You can't just walk in and say Tylenol causes autism. You have to do a lot of groundwork and preparation so that people will believe you. And it might just be that it's not me seeing that a huge number of people have had that groundwork laid, and that I'm looking in from the outside.
Maybe.
And I'm not seeing that millions of people have been brought up to the point where they will just sit there and go, oh, Tylenol, okay, I can go with that. That's fine. That works for me. Sorry, my cat is.
I guess
she wants
you watching these real time events going on is me reading a book that has info dumps in it, and me being like, who is convinced by an info dump? This isn't how you write a novel. But then everyone else is giving it 5 stars. Yeah. So then the administration is info dumping bad things to us. And I'm like, who's falling for this? Apparently everybody. Okay, great.
Yeah, they had read books 1 to 9, and we've kind of arrived in the middle of book 10 and gone, why? I don't understand what's happening. But it's because it's gone mainstream at book 10 and that we missed all of the previous 9 books. So that's the only explanation I can think of.
Yeah. Well, it's one lore dump that I'm happy to skip.
Yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, I have to teach it.
Yeah.
Or at least I have to explain how it happened.
Yep. And how it's definitely not happening again.
Well, it's very strange because we're kind of following along in the UK at the moment. So we're always sort of a few steps behind the US in those terms, and we've sort of caught up, but yeah, it's starting to happen over here as well. I mean, we did have a huge scandal with vaccines and autism back in the 1990s, so we've kind of come around from that a little bit. But whether we go back down the wormhole of this strangeness, I don't know. But yeah,
well, this is kind of like when I was thinking about when I was reading Radium Girls, and about, again, the whole thing of like your medical records like are your property, and there was this, a lot of this came about because there was legislation put in place after the fact that did not in any way help the girls who had already been poisoned by radium. But now we do have workplace safety. Now we do have workplace safety standards. We have like the disclosure of this information. You have a right to this information. You have a right to your own medical records. Like all these things came about because of these people suffering and dying, and now we take them for granted. We're like, well, of course, those are just like, that's just a right that you have. Like, no, it's not just a right that you have, that people fought and died for those rights. And similarly with vaccines, like we've lived so long with the assumption that people just don't get sick because this is the modern day. We have modern medicine. You just don't get sick. But vaccines, we should get rid of those. Like, why is it you think that you don't get sick? Like, you've lived so long in a world where this isn't a factor.
Yes.
You've forgotten that there's a reason it's not a factor.
Yes. And it goes the same with working rights as well. And we've gone so long with thinking that we get weekends. And I mean, obviously in the States,
8-hour workday.
You're not guaranteed 8-hour workday, but then maternity leave in the UK and things like that. We've had those things for so long that we don't realize that actually that was a huge battle that had to be fought on the streets to get those kind of rights. And it wasn't, working life was absolutely horrific before that. And there were no rights, and housing standards as well. It goes to everything. We're so used to these particular things and having them that we take them as guarantees. And now to challenge them and say, well, why do we need to take these vaccines? And it's like, well, because those illnesses really are horrific.
Yeah.
Once they get loose.
Well, even though there's too much regulation, and you're like, but you know what happens when there's no regulation? People have asbestos in their paint and radium on their dials, and they're all suffering and dying because there's no one to say, no, you can't do that.
Yes, yeah, and that's and I was tempted to do, because having just spent the summer working on ancient medicine and magic, was to do something on discussing how that worked to the marketplace, and say we're going to head back to a place where you walk into the street and you can choose between someone doing you a curse tablet to treat your illness, or actually getting proper medicine, and having literally no way to tell the difference. And you don't want to live in that world. You don't want to live in a world like that.
I think the modern day equivalent of the curse tablet is the supplements that are sold by grifters.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there was a whole, this is totally off topic now. I spent weeks reading about drug peddlers in the ancient world who sold medicines, and you could pay them to, you didn't like so and so down the road, you paid them to give them dodgy medicine, and they died. And Cicero even did a court case about it. That's not something you want to see. I think it was Celsus also wrote something about they had snake charmers, so they would get this snake to bite them as a public display to say, this is how good I am at my job. So they get the snake to bite them, and then they suck the poison out and spit it out and then drink water. And one supposedly died because someone just neatly walked up and just took the water off his stand while he was doing the performance, so he wasn't able to swill out his mouth, and he died of the poison. So, or venom, I should say, get that accurate. But yeah, you're facing a world where you live in a level of uncertainty that you just don't want to experience, and it's kind of horrible. I don't want to. Sorry, I've always find a way to take it back to some random thing that I was studying like 3 weeks ago. Oh yeah, I read this thing.
I mean, between autism,
that's
misinformation,
what pharmaceuticals were.
Between autism, misinformation, and the Moomins, what is going to be the more passionate?
I don't know. I keep it all in separate areas of my brain. And if someone says to me Moomins, then I just like talk about the Moomins for a long period of time. And if someone says to me, so ancient magic, I go, right, here's all my thing about ancient magic.
You have multiple files.
I just keep it all in different. Yeah, I've just got little areas of the cloud storage in my brain is kind of neatly segmented into different places, and I just plug into whichever one I need, depending on what someone's asking me about.
Your mind palace is vast.
I just wish it was full of more useful stuff.
Okay, so truly then, we have fixed Babel. We have fixed all the world's problems also. So I think that's pretty efficient for a day's work.
Yes, it is. It is. That's really efficient. I like that. Thank you very much for having me on to talk.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
It was fantastic to rewrite Babel for
Yeah. Well, it was. I mean,
2025.
it is tricky sometimes being the complainy negative reviewer that I am to actually speak to somebody who maybe disagrees with me because they just want to fight about it, and I sincerely don't want to fight about it. I want to have a conversation with somebody who holds a different view from me, and let's. I would love to know why your experience of this was different from mine, and maybe you will change my mind. That didn't happen today, but
Nope.
I absolutely like to discuss the debate and pick apart. So thank you for coming on and subjecting yourself to this.
No, that's absolutely fine. I really enjoyed I just enjoy talking about ancient magic. So it's lovely to have that opportunity and to sort of imagine a much stronger book.
The book we could have had in the better timeline.
Yes, the one we're not having.
Well, thank you very much. For you, I think it's very late. For me, it's midday Saturday. So for anyone here, enjoy the rest of your day. And for you, I guess, have good night. Sweet dreams.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And everyone,
I'm sure I will see you around.
Yes, and Jolie's channel is linked down below, as well as the video specifically that this all came from. So go check those out. And yeah, I'll talk to you maybe again sometime soon.
Yeah, that would be fun.
You'll just have to find another thing to disagree with me about.
Yeah, I'll be going through all of your old videos going, that one.
It's the bat signal is a video from you being like, well, actually.
Yeah. No, I think the next one is going to have to be Catabasis because I've just finished reading that. But my next video, I really need to put out this second one about ancient magic and the handbooks because I've been working on it for so long. I
have no intention of reading Catabasis except that I hold space for the fact that your video, whenever it comes, may convince me otherwise, and maybe that will be the reason that I do pick it up. No pressure.
No, well, it would be really interesting because to get that perspective, I have steered clear of all critiques because most of the people that I've seen reading it have been negative about it, and I thought I don't want anyone to colour my view until I get to the end because I related to it. But I'm more than happy to hear people say this doesn't work, you can't do this, and go, well, maybe it's not for you. Maybe she has literally written this for a woman who understood what it was like to live through the 80s and been a PhD student, which is a very niche group of people. I appreciate
it was written specifically with you in mind.
And yes, just me, especially because it's also ancient magic. So it's like, yeah, this is just me, basically.
Well, I hope it you said you haven't finished it yet, I think, so I hope it lives up all the way till the last page, and I very much look forward to seeing your video on it, and I hope everyone else here also goes to check it out whenever it comes out, which will be soon, I think. Yes.
Yes, it should, hopefully maybe the week after next.
All right, then it will all look out for it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Okay. Bye.